subscribe and share to this channel and view all the very interesting videos that I have. So today we're going to be covering observations that I made and inferences and guesses, and I would also say some things that I gleaned while I was watching The Avatar and the Fire Lord. It's an episode from Book 3 of Avatar The Last Airbender. So when the episode begins, Aang sees Roku in a dream. And first of all, I just think it's very interesting the role that dreams play in the Avatar universe. Like, we have this one with Roku and Aang, and we also have one where Zuko is fighting his inner self, and he gets sick, and then he has a dream where he becomes the Avatar, and it's very interesting to see how much influence dreams seem to have in the Avatar universe, and it's just a bit of symbolism that we have here. Now, then we get to Zuko, who sees someone delivering him a letter. And of course, we learn at the end of the episode that Iroh sent the letter. So my question is, who delivered the letter? So does Iroh have people doing favors for him while he's in prison? Like, I guess it could be that female guard who was really nice to Iroh. Maybe she did him the favor, but I don't see Iroh putting anyone in danger like that. So maybe Iroh knows how to, or maybe Iroh is able to break out of his prison freely, and so he's just choosing to stay there. But then that wouldn't make sense because he's exercising so that he can break out of prison. So I wonder who delivered the letter to Zuko, even though we know that Iroh sent it. So that's interesting. And another thing is, how did Iroh, I guess Iroh must have read Sozin's diary at some point, which is probably how he knows about Roku's story. Or it's also possible that maybe Iroh spoke to Roku while in the spirit world, because maybe Iroh visited the spirit world and he had a run-in with Roku and they had a little conversation. I guess that's also possible. That would be cool. But I do find it more, I think it leans in the direction of Iroh just having read Sozin's scroll, which I guess maybe Azulan did that too then. So maybe Azulan also knew, and maybe Ozai read it too, or maybe he didn't. Or maybe, and which also leads a little further. How much does Ursa know about this story? How much does Ursa know about the relationship between Roku and Sozin? Like, did her mother tell her, or did her grandmother tell her, or yeah, those are just questions I have as we move on. That's quite a few questions. And then, of course, we cut to the scene where Aang sees Roku's home, and then he realizes that it's Roku's home, which is possible because, which I guess could be because Roku showed him the home and told him where it was. Or it's also possible that, you know, how avatars can recognize things from their past lives. So since Aang was Roku in his past life, he just happens to recognize the home. And then when Toph touches the ground, she mentions that an entire village and hundreds of houses are completely buried in ash. And that reminds me of Pompeii, the volcano, and there's frozen statues that once used to be people, and they were paralyzed because of the volcano. And so maybe Roku and Feng are still paralyzed. Maybe so, like, their statue forms are still on the volcano, which I guess would have been really cool to see, but they didn't go in that direction. And also, I'll bring this up later too, but when it says an entire village of hundreds of houses is buried, I think it's clear that a lot of people did die in this explosion. Yes, and then of course, Zuko and Azula have their little chat in front of the portraits of the Fire Lords. And of course, Azula sort of burns Zuko by one of his scar and saying that he should get his portrait done on his good side, which, yeah, we know what that means. It's a little bit of a cruel joke, but But moving on, it's interesting how pictures there are still pictures of Sozin's father and the Fire Lords before that, because in the comics Smoke and Shadow, we learned that Sozin sort of sealed off some of the history of the Fire Nation so that it would make it seem like it started with Sozin. So if he did that, then why didn't he just cover up all the pictures of the previous Fire Lords too? I don't get why I didn't do that. Let's see. So Azula obviously goes on to list some of the basic facts about Sozin starting the war, and she's just basically sounds like a Fire Nation sycophant who's being taught all the propaganda taught in Fire Nation schools and only says the good things about Sozin. Excuse me. Yeah, that's interesting what they do. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, Team Avatar is sitting on the tip of hardened lava, which is just a cool geographic and sort of science thing. Like it's cool to see lava frozen. And then, of course, moving on. Yeah, how does Iroh keep sending Zuko these scrolls? Like, who is he using to deliver them? It's really interesting. I mean, I know that people like maybe do favors for other people in prison, but it's just very strange how he manages to do that. Does he have like a secret animal or something? What's the deal? And of course, Zuko is very careful to not be seen by the fire sages, which is interesting. So maybe the sage is would rat out Zuko, or maybe the sage would be uncomfortable seeing Zuko, or maybe Zuko just doesn't want to be seen. And if he wants to read so it's a secret history. So obviously, Sozin himself probably hid it because he didn't want the truth about him getting out. He didn't want people to remember that he was friends with the Avatar and all that stuff. And it's also possible that maybe Azulan hit it as well. And the final testimony of Firelord Sozin. So I think it's somewhat clear. So there's a few things about this. Oh yeah, and funny line, Roku says that they're going to visit my past, our shared past, and meaning that obviously it's because he and Aang had the same past life, but it's funny because like they're different people, but they were the same person. It's just a fun line. Uh, so Sozin says that he can feel his own life dimming, and he can think of a time when things were much brighter. So at this point, it's like the cliche old saying, money doesn't buy happiness, and I guess in this case, power doesn't buy happiness. So Sozin has everything he wants. He's very powerful. He's ruling over a very strong nation, and he's started a war, and he's getting what he wants, but he keeps wanting more, and he doesn't feel fulfilled. And maybe before, when he had less, he felt better. So it's just one of those life lessons. And of course, he mentions that his life is dimming. And from what Azula said, it just sounds like Sozin passed away peacefully in his sleep at 102. So his life dimming, but maybe that means that he was feeling a little sick, or maybe just wasn't feeling too well. And so maybe the Fire Nation tried to cover it up and revise their history a little bit to pretend that Sozin was so strong and healthy up until the age of 102, which is possible, but who knows? And people do live longer in the Avatar universe, but the point is, it's possible that Sozin was actually maybe not as physically well as the Fire Nation wanted its people and the other people of the world to believe. Because if it's made known that the Fire Lord is physically getting weaker, well, it's going to make the Fire Nation look weaker to other nations, and that's really bad in the middle of a war, especially. And people might try to exploit that, or maybe it's just also for Sozin's self-esteem and the Fire Nation's self-esteem. So there's that stuff. And if so, of course, my own life dimming, that can just be a figure of speech. So it's just maybe something is just a figurative saying, and he doesn't actually mean that he's physically getting weaker. And another theory that I want to throw out there is that perhaps in the same way that Ozai poisoned Azulon, maybe Azulon poisoned Sozin. So maybe that was what happened to Sozin. But got a little off track, but okay. So we see that Prince Sozin and Roku were friends. And before I make an observation about that, see how Sozin beats Roku in this little fight they're having. He makes Roku trip over a tree root, and that reminds me of the story that Azula told about Sozin in the Battle of Hantui, how Sozin used the enemy's weaknesses to their advantage because the enemy was dry and didn't have much water, so he made them burn. So it shows that Sozin is very clever and knows how to use his surroundings well. So just a little nod there. And of course, I mentioned this in another video, but Avatar Roku being friends with Sozin at a young age, I think that heavily implies, actually, that's pretty much a given, that Avatar Roku's parents were very rich, maybe very important members of the Fire Nation, maybe like nobility. So some are very high up, maybe close to the Fire Lord himself, because a regular guy wouldn't be friends with the prince of the Fire Nation. So Roku's parents would have had to be very rich members living in the capital and probably with strong connections to the palace. And that brings me to the other point. So the girl that Roku has a crush on, Tamin, who later becomes his wife, she lives there as well. So it's probably likely that the girl Tamin is also a member of a very rich family. Let's go on. Okay. So Sozin and Roku share the same birthday, which is really cool. Like, imagine sharing the same birthday with your best friend. That's pretty nice. And the statistics of that happening, like for you to happen to be friends with someone who was born on the exact same day as you, that's really funny. Now, but there's also a little bit of symbolism here where they were born on the same day, but they end up leading very different paths, and they diverge. Now, that sort of reminds me of Robert Frost's poem about two roads, like how he took the path least traveled by, and that has made the difference, and that really plays out in this episode here of Avatar. So when the fire sages come in, Sozin asks, "What happened to my? Did something happen to my father?" And so that can just be brushed over as a line, but when you really look at it, why isn't Sozin's father, the Fire Lord, at his son's birthday party? Like, why isn't the father at the son's birthday party? The father is literally the leader of the nation, and his son is the crown prince, and it's his 16th birthday, and he clearly probably has the time, and it's taking place right in the capital, so why isn't the Fire Lord himself there? Maybe this is just a detail that they just threw in there as a line, but I think it implies something more, because it's possible that Sozin had trouble, difficulty, or maybe a distant relationship with his own father, which might have influenced the way he turned out. Because it seems like the Fire Nation is at peace at this point, so maybe the fact that Sozin didn't have such a close relationship with his own father caused him to govern differently from his father, which led him to become more hawkish and more warlike. And maybe that influenced his relationship with Azulan, which in turn influenced Azulan's relationship with Iroh and Ozai, although Azulan does seem to favor Iroh, but I'm not sure that Azulan truly liked Iroh either. I think he just valued him more than Ozai, because Ozai is just a jerk. But Azulan clearly wasn't nice to Ozai at all. And then, of course, Ozai is awful to Zuko, and although he values Azula, it's clear that he doesn't actually care about her, and that he's more than willing to threaten her if it means fulfilling his own agenda. So speculation that maybe Sozin didn't have a close relationship with his father, just judging from the fact that his father wasn't even at his birthday party. Now, of course, the Fire Sages go to Roku and they tell him that he's the Avatar, and obviously, by tradition, the Avatar is told that he or she is the Avatar when they are 16, and Roku is 16 at this point, and so obviously they knew that Roku was the Avatar the whole time, so I guess in Roku's case, it would have probably been easier to track him down and pinpoint him as the Avatar. because he was living in the capital, and so it was probably easier to find him. Maybe they tested all the babies right when Kyoshi died, and they found out that Roku was the Avatar. Of course, and we know from the Kyoshi novel that they had trouble finding the Avatar in Kyoshi's time because obviously Kyoshi wasn't born in such an obvious location. She was born to criminals and then lived a little isolated, so it was harder to find her. But I guess in the case of Roku, it was easier to find him because he was right in the capital of the Fire Nation, and the Fire Sages would have been looking. So, when Sozin gives Roku the Crown Prince headpiece, that symbolizes that Sozin really values this friendship, and he's giving a part of himself to Roku, and that's the part of himself that Roku chooses to remember him by. So this also has to do with so Sozin giving Roku his headpiece, which is a very important item, symbolizes that Sozin is giving Roku a part of himself, and when Roku takes that, he takes the memory of Sozin, so he takes his recollection, his perception of Sozin, and he keeps it. And so that's what he sticks by, and that becomes an attachment, and that is also why he is unable to destroy Sozin, because he still has that fond attachment to him. So it's a physical manifestation of Roku's connection to Sozin. Of course, and then there is a part where Aang farts, and he's moving, his body's moving, even though he's in the spirit world, which is interesting. So it reminds me of Legend of Korra, where Zahir actually manages to speak to the Red Lotus and tell them that Korra is in the Misty Palms Oasis Inn, while his spirit is still in the spirit world, and he's talking in his body, he's sort of cautious, he's sending a message through his body. So it sort of reminds me of this, except Aang is just farting. Of course, it shows that Roku and Monk Gyatso were friends, so Monk Gyatso must have felt great being able to be friends with Aang later because he was friends with Roku, so that's awesome. And Roku is a lot taller than Gyatso, so maybe Gyatso is just short, or maybe Gyatso is significantly younger than Roku, or maybe a little bit younger, possibly the same age. It's hard to tell because Roku was 70 when he died, and then of course, Aang was born, and Gyatso seems pretty old then, so who knows? I don't know their exact age, or if it was revealed. And we show Roku and Gyatso trying the glider tricks and fooling around, so it shows that Roku has a very fun side to him, and also Gyatso does too. And I'm sure Gyatso also, when Gyatso was playing pranks with Aang, it reminded him of his time with Roku. And it's interesting how Gyatso never told Aang that he was friends with Roku, but at the same time, Gyatso didn't really want Aang to feel like he had to grow up so fast to be the Avatar. He wanted to give him a childhood, so maybe that's why. But then when Aang was told, and when Aang wasn't feeling well, that's probably when Gyatso could have told Aang about his friendship with Roku, and that might have made him feel better, but who knows? Yeah, so moving on. Some friendships are so strong they can even transcend lifetime. So we see that with Liu Beifong, Hai Ran, and also Jianzhu and Kelsang, who all knew Avatar Kuruk and Avatar Kyoshi, and of course Monk Gyatso, who knew Avatar Roku and Avatar Aang, and of course Toph, Katara, and Zuko, who knew Avatar Aang and Avatar Korra. And of course, also the Su and Lin and Azumi and Iroh and all those guys fit that mold as well, and Tenzin and everyone else. But yeah, moving on. Roku mentions that he had trouble with water bending, but he managed to master it really well. And then, of course, this reminds me. So Aang had trouble with earth bending. Korra had trouble with airbending, excuse me, and Roku had trouble with water bending. But if you remember, so the Avatar seems to have more trouble with one element than the others, learning it at least. But if you remember, Aang actually did have trouble with water bending too. It was hard for him to get the motions, but that was because he was also playing around and messing around with Momo, and he wasn't really into his lessons at first. but then he got pretty used to it. And with earthbending, he struggled at first, but then he managed to get it pretty well. And with firebending, obviously he had the traumatic experience with burning Katara, and he was really scared of firebending for a long, long time, and he was unable to do it. So I would argue that Aang had a lot of trouble with earthbending and firebending up until before he met the dragons Ran and Shaw, because he didn't really understand firebending or earthbending, and so Aang had trouble with earth and fire, and less so, but still very prevalent with water. So it's normal to have trouble learning the elements, like it's normal. And of course, Roku mentions his earthbending teacher, Sud, and they're doing it, and they're like doing earthbending practice together. Now, I talked about this in my Rocky Lava Bending video, but I theorize that since Roku knows how to lava bend, his earthbending teacher Sud probably taught him, and so maybe his earthbending teacher Sud also knows how to lava bend. So that was just a theory that I had. Now, Sozin later mentions that it was 12 years since he saw Roku again, and of course, because the Avatar spends 4 years mastering each element, so Roku would have, since Roku already knows firebending, he would have then gone to the air temple to learn airbending for 4 years, and then waterbending for 4 years, and earthbending for 4 years, so 4 times 3 is 12. Yeah. And obviously, Sozin mentions that a lot has changed, and that he had changed as well. So he doesn't exactly elaborate on this, so we don't know what happened to Sozin in between these times. Maybe a lot of things happened. Maybe he had some traumatic experiences, or maybe he had some dramatic experiences, or lots of different things happened to him, and so something caused him to change, where he became more hawkish and imperialist and got these ambitions. So who knows what exactly happened, but it's clear that something significant happened, because Sozin didn't change overnight. That's very clear. He changed over the course of many years. Maybe something happened with his father too. Maybe there was something going on. So it's not exactly explained what truly happened to Sozin to make him turn into the way that he was, because the bad changes happen over time, so there was always signals. And then Roku mentions that Sozin was his best man at his wedding, which is funny that they have that concept in Avatar 2, and then that he married Tamin, who obviously had a crush on him, and he had a crush on her, and they were both too shy to do it, but I guess Roku finally acted on it, and he says that when love is real, it finds a way, and being the alpha doesn't hurt your chances, so maybe that implies that he used other women to get her jealous first, or who knows. But like, obviously, he got the courage to speak up and be good. And then Sozin mentions that on wedding days, they look to the future with optimism and joy, and Sozin had his own version of what that joy looked like, and he talked about that with Roku, and yeah, they have cookies in the Avatar universe. That's funny. They have cookies, and Roku immediately deduces what Sozin means when he mentions sharing the prosperity with the rest of the world. And I think Sozin at first probably had maybe interesting intentions. Who knows? But obviously they became malignant intentions, and Roku immediately sees the danger and just cuts him off. It's very clear. And Sozin says, Roku, you haven't even considered the possibilities. So what possibilities? I'm just wondering what Sozin means by that. And I could think of a few things, but who knows what exactly he means. And then Roku is very adamant. This last I want to hear about this. And he mentions that the 4 nations are meant to be just 4, which actually is sort of the opposite thing that they do in the Promise comics, where they build republics, the United Republic with Republic City out of the Fire Nation colonies, and of course the many different concepts in Legend of Korra and story arcs that involve that as well. So that's interesting. Now, Roku mentions that this was his first real test as the Avatar, and he took many years to realize, to learn it. So I guess he hadn't really been faced with hard decision before, which is interesting. Or maybe he had, but they were easy to deal with. And of course, when Roku flies over some water and approaches the Earth Kingdom, he sees that the Fire Nation has colonized part of the Earth Kingdom already. And so, why didn't Roku know this before this happened? Why didn't he prevent it? Why didn't he get the news before that? Maybe the Fire Nation acted quickly and managed to cut off communication and handled in such a way that it was just too fast for anyone to react. Or maybe Roku was busy dealing with another conflict in another nation. So maybe something was happening in the Northern Water Tribe with the Southern Water Tribe, or maybe within the Fire Nation, or maybe in other parts of the Earth Kingdom. So who knows? But it seems like Roku. I'm just going to guess that Roku was preoccupied with something happening in the Southern Water Tribe, maybe with pirates or something. So he didn't have time to deal with this Earth Kingdom thing before it happened, but then he found it. And I would assume that he probably dealt with the colony and kicked all the Fire Nation people out of that Earth Kingdom colony before going to confront Sozin. And I'm sure that Roku spoke with Kiyoshi, his past life, before confronting Sozin. I'm sure she probably told him to eliminate Sozin quickly, which I guess Roku would have had a hard time agreeing to. And I'm sure Kiyoshi brought up her time with Chin the Conqueror and how she took care of him. Now, I think this fight with Roku and Sozin might sort of imply a few things. So Sozin shoots a huge wave of fire, so he's clearly very powerful and he can summon a lot of power even without the comet. So that's impressive. Now Roku probably figured that Sozin was going to attack when he walked away, or it's possible that maybe Roku has seismic sense like Top and Booby, and he could feel Sozin's motions when he felt his motion on the ground, and so he went to the ground and came back out and blew him away. And so maybe he could see the motions before he did them. And of course, even though Sozin is very powerful and attacks very swiftly, Roku swats Sozin away like he's some bug, which shows the tremendous power that a full-fledged avatar has. Like when you see Roku and Kiyoshi, they make very little motions, they do very little, but then they do a lot of damage with their little moves. Quite powerful. And of course, Roku blows up the palace using the avatar state. And obviously this does a few things. It's dramatic and it shows a message, and it's like saying to Sozin, hey, this palace could be you. I could do this to you, so you better watch it and you better not mess around, because you see what I did to this palace here? Yeah, it's the least of what I can do. It's a clear warning. It's a visual representation of a warning. Now, if Roku did want to eliminate Sozin in this scene, he could have done it a few different ways. So if he wanted to use waterbending to do it, he could have done what Avatar Kiyoshi did to Yun by freezing his heart and lungs, by freezing Sozin's heart and lungs. If he wanted to use earthbending, he could have just lava bended the rocky pillar that Sozin was suspended to, and it would have lava bended and Sozin would have fallen into the lava. Or if you want to use firebending, maybe some lightning. If you want to use airbending, maybe you could have just used the airbending move that Zahir used on the Earth Queen and sucked it out of the lungs. And the air nomads probably didn't teach him that, but I'm sure he figured it out, and I'm sure he knew it. I'm sure more people knew it than Zahir did. Like, I'm sure Zahir wasn't the only one who knew it. And of course, Roku mentions that he and Sozin didn't talk to each other for 25 years, which is expected, but I also find that strange because Sozin is ruling one of the four nations, and so were there no conflicts in the Fire Nation itself for 25 years that Sozin needed Roku to handle, or did Sozin handle all the problems by himself, or did Roku handle some problems with the Fire Nation without Sozin's knowledge, or maybe Sozin sent other people to ask Roku for help, or maybe there was some indirect communication going on, because it's hard for a world leader and Avatar to not have contact at all. So that's a very questionable statement. And of course, Roku's headpiece falls off as he and his wife flee the volcano. But the weird thing is, so we see that headpiece again in the comic, The Search, where Ursa's mother is holding it. And then, of course, we see that Iroh has it at the end of this episode and gives it to Zuko. So I guess Ursa's mother, Roku's daughter, just managed to go back and dig it up. But it's a very small thing. So how did they manage to dig it up from all the other stuff that was in the volcano? Because it would have gotten lost. So it's impressive that they found it. It's just very interesting that they found it. And it's also worth noting that despite the fight, Roku still kept Sozon's headpiece. So because I think the memory of his friendship still meant something to them, and like I said, it's the physical representation of Roku taking the view of Sozin that he wants to take, because he wants to believe that that's still the Sozin that who exists, but it's not, and it's just Roku being stubborn and sticking on and holding on to the memory of the past. And of course, when we're seeing everyone escape, we see Fang flying out of the volcano hole, the dragon just flying out. And then, as everyone is running away and the smoke is about to overtake them, Roku does some airbending to make sure the smoke doesn't overtake everyone. And it's possible that a lot of people were already dead by this point, but he used the air to let the others escape. And it's possible that other people were still trying to get out of the volcano, and Roku was trying to give them time and help. He was going to help them out after dealing with volcano. So I don't think Roku was just fighting the volcanoes. I think he was also trying to help people who were still trapped, because there's no way everyone can run that fast and get out that quickly. Yeah, I don't see why Roku didn't use lava bending a lot more in here, because he certainly could have. And then Roku does airbend a lot of air, which freezes the lava, which is very interesting and a pretty fun move. I guess he just has to make the air really cold. And then he goes into the Avatar state and blows up one of the volcanoes. And then, of course, Sozin shows up, and the interesting thing is Roku finally uses lava bending with the second volcano, makes the lava go down, and then, but then I guess Roku can't. It's unclear how much lava bending Roku knows or uses, because in the episode with the solstice, he uses a lot of it, and he uses it pretty freely. But then this, we see that he can manipulate lava and move it around a little bit, but Sozin is the one who uses heat conduction to transfer the heat from the lava out so that the lava freezes. So I guess maybe Roku didn't know how to freeze lava back, or maybe he just wanted to let Sozin do some work. Yep, and then Sozin betrays Roku, and so on and so forth. And then Sozin mentions that with Roku gone and the Great Comet returning, the timing was perfect to change the world. And so Sozin wipes out the air temples because he knows that the next avatar is going to be an air nomad. And so he does mention that he knows that the avatar eluded him. So how? Like they're probably just going in and randomly killing the air nomads. So do they capture some of them and then test them first to make sure before disposing of them? Or like what was the process like? Because how would you know that you didn't get the avatar? How would you know that you did get the avatar? Did someone tell him that the avatar was already gone? And then maybe he just wiped them all out because he didn't believe them, but then he realized that they were telling the truth. How exactly did Sozin know that the avatar wasn't killed in the raid? It's interesting how he knew that. And of course, the whole world knows that the avatar disappeared and that he didn't die in the air nomad genocide. So maybe Sozin went around telling people, and then the whole world knew. But then it's weird because Sozin wouldn't be giving people hope like that. So because he wants to conquer them. So it's just interesting how everyone knew that the Avatar wasn't at the Air Temple when that happened. And I don't think that's something the monks would advertise. So who knows? But obviously Sozin knew, and then Sozin mentions that he spent the rest of his life searching in vain for the Avatar, and there's literally a scene where a ship is crossing over above the water where Aang is frozen, and so like he could literally have just found him then, but then he didn't. Like it's like the thing is right there, but you still can't find it. And then he mentions that he knows the Avatar is hiding out there somewhere. Fire Nation's greatest threat, the last Airbender. So he says that he wasted the remainder of his life searching in vain. So is he still searching at this point, or does he know that he's going to die soon, or maybe Sozin? And so, like, does he think that the Avatar has already mastered all the elements and is just waiting to come? Who knows? It's interesting what exactly Sozin is thought processes, and he says that he seems to know that it's the end of his life, so maybe he just knows that he's not going to make it, or maybe Sozin really regretted his actions, or maybe not regretted but felt bad about them, and that is maybe he decided to take the easy way out. So maybe that's why Sozin passed away suddenly at 102. Who knows? Of course, and then this is the first time that Iroh actually talks to Zuko while he's in prison. Like, Iroh actually speaks words, because at first he doesn't talk to him at all or look at him at all. And then, of course, Iroh mentions that Zuko's great-grandfather, and so Iroh makes an important point. You have more than one great-grandfather. Sozin was your father's grandfather. Your mother's grandfather was Avatar Roku. And actually, Zuko had a surprisingly calmer than I would have expected reaction to this. But the point is, people have more than one great-grandfather, and they have more than two great-grandfathers, just to be clear. Everyone has four great-grandfathers. Four. Because you have two parents, you have four grandparents. Each one of your four grandparents has two parents, so that makes 8 great-grandparents. So 4 of them would be male and 4 of them would be female. So in the case of Prince Zuko, his father's grandfather, one of his father's grandfathers would be Sozin, but his father's other grandfather would be the father of Isla, because Isla was Ozai's mother. So Ozai's grandfather through his father's side was Sozin, and his grandfather through his mother's side would have been someone else. And then in the case of Ursa, her grandfather through her father's side would have been someone. So her father was Jinzuk, so his father would have been Ursa's grandfather. And then Ursa's other grandfather would be her mother's father, Avatar Roku. So Ursa had two grandfathers. Ozai had 2 grandfathers. Zuko is the son of Ursa and Ozai, so Zuko has 4 great-grandfathers, and that's the same deal for everyone in real and in fake life, to be clear. And then Iroh, I'm just surprised Iroh didn't tell Zuko about this sooner. And it's clear that Iroh is egging Zuko on to turn back to the light side. And when he says all this, when he says, you can cleanse the sins of our family and the Fire Nation born in you, along with the strength is the power to restore balance of the world. So it's clear that Iroh is already just clearly setting up Zuko to be the next Fire Lord. It's very, very, very clear that Iroh's been planning this for a while, and then Iroh just happens to have Roku's headpiece, or Sozin's headpiece, inside the prison with him behind a brick. So if Iroh can remove the bricks, then why doesn't he just remove them to escape instead of just breaking open the bars? Like, maybe just wanted something dramatic. Like, what's the deal? But okay, how is Iroh keeping all that in prison? Like, what else does he have in prison? Like, how does Iroh have so much freedom in the prison? Really, really weird. And then, of course, Toph is casting doubt on whether or not friendships can really last past lifetimes. And then Aang says that. And then, of course, the ironic thing is Toph ends up meeting Avatar Korra later. So that proves the point that yes, they can. So that was my rundown of this episode. Subscribe and share to this channel and look at all my other interesting videos because they're pretty good. You'll find something for you. So view, subscribe, and share.